All right. We'll give everyone just a second or two to file in here. But for everyone who is in and with us, welcome to the Press Box. I'm Alex Nitkin. I'm editor of the Daily Line. If you are new or if this is your first one of these that we've been to, welcome. This is a free, roughly monthly webinar that we at the Daily Line put out in collaboration with a guest journalist, usually to recap Chicago City Council meetings every month, but also with our esteemed Springfield and state knowledgeable colleagues to talk about important things that happen in state government and politics. So on that note, welcome. I want to welcome my colleague Ben Szalinski, legislative reporter at the Daily Line. How you doing, Ben?
I'm good, thanks, Alex.
And a very special welcome to Brenden Moore, government and politics reporter at Lee Enterprises, where he covers government and politics at 5 different papers all over the state. How you doing, Brenden? Well, thanks so much for joining us here.
Thank you guys for having me.
All right. So we're going to try to keep this to an hour, give or take. We want to be respectful of everyone's time. We're going to go through some different races at the state and the Cook County level, and then we're going to draw some takeaways at the end, and then we want to leave a healthy amount of time at the end for questions, for any questions that come up. So if you go into the chat, there should be a chat option, and feel free to pepper any questions at us over the course of the event here, and we'll try to get to as many as we can to the best of our ability. So it's been a very busy week. It was a busy election. A lot happened. This is essentially what we're going to talk about from the top of the ballot on down. The gubernatorial race, of course, is the top thing. Congressional races, Secretary of State. We're going to go through a couple of notable state rep and Senate races, especially ones that were sort of surprising or are going to maybe shift the balance a little bit in the legislature. We're going to then shift into Cook County, talk about the assessor's race and Kaegi's reelection, and then Board of Review, which is criminally undercovered and near and dear to my heart. We'll talk about the Cook County Commissioner races and round up a few other things that have not really been followed so much. We'll draw some takeaways and cast ahead to November, and then we'll take any questions that are left over. So let's dive into it. This was not exactly a surprise that Darren Bailey won by a pretty hefty margin in a crowded field of five or six Republican candidates. I think it probably would have been a surprise 2 months or even a month ago, Ben, right? So what exactly happened with this race? Can you break down exactly how big a victory this was for Darren Bailey and what exactly happened?
Yeah, the writing's been on the wall over the last month or so for Bailey since the Sun-Times put out a poll back at the beginning of June. It was the first time that we really saw that Darren Bailey is actually leading this race. But it seemed like for most of the race, he really had the momentum on his side because of the way Richard Irvin campaigned or lack of campaigning. And Bailey's popular downstate with a conservative Republican base. So he was always going to be a competitive opponent, no matter, how well Richard Irvin did in this race. But then just poll after poll throughout the month of June just confirmed, basically what we saw on Tuesday is that Darren Bailey has a pretty clear mandate from Illinois Republican voters. I don't think the polls even accounted for the size of Bailey's win. A lot of polls said maybe 20, 30 points at the most. I mean, Bailey completely undid the state. He won. He got almost 60% of the vote. Jesse Sullivan finished second with 16%. This was not a close race. The people of Illinois the Republican voters clearly think Darren Bailey is the one who needs to challenge Governor Pritzker. And I think it's, a lot of it kind of just comes down to the work that Bailey has done over the last 2 years, challenging pandemic mandates and the name he has just made for himself. So he got Donald Trump's endorsement last weekend. I really don't think that even made much of a difference in this race. Maybe it swayed some more undecided voters into his camp. But I think Bailey was going to win this race with Trump's endorsement or not. And he earned it, and he fought really hard for it. He campaigned in all 102 counties over the last 3 weeks of June. It's pretty clear what Republican voters want.
Before getting Trump's explicit blessing, right? Through every tactic. Brenden, originally a couple months ago, Richard Irvin was the powerhouse on paper. He was like the perfect candidate. He had approximately $1 gazillion from Ken Griffin, basically unlimited money. I saw commercials for him all the time. How did he end up coming in third? How did he collapse like this?
Well, Alex, there are a lot of reasons. As you said, Mayor Irvin got into this race in early January, had the backing of Illinois' richest man, Ken Griffin, multi-billionaire, pledged $200 to $300 million to support Irvin and this quote unquote slate for statewide office, all the statewide offices. And Irvin, like you said, on paper had this seemed like a great candidate. He's a mayor of the second largest city. Rose, pulled himself up by his bootstraps. Had a single mother, went to law school, served in the military. African American. Mayor who could possibly appeal to moderate suburban voters that you need to win an election as a Republican in Illinois. But his campaign never really took off. For all the ads that they ran, he faced questions about whether he was a true conservative. He voted in more Democratic primaries for the past decade than he did Republican primaries. They have him on tape praising Governor Pritzker's pandemic response. And at the same time, you have a candidate like Darren Bailey, who is about as conservative as they come. And let's just say there were some forces that made sure that message got out. Governor Pritzker and the Democratic Governors Association spent well over $30 million running negative ads against Richard Irvin. And I'll put these in air quotes, negative ads against Darren Bailey, saying that he's too conservative for Illinois, which obviously in a Republican primary is what Republican voters want to hear. At the same time, you had Richard Uihlein, another conservative mega donor, and Dan Proft running ads from Irvin's right, criticizing him. So Griffin poured $50 million into this race for Irvin, but there was also a lot of money against him. And quite frankly, a lot of people think that Irvin just didn't perform as a candidate. He kind of stayed away from reporters throughout the whole campaign, just kind of tried to run ads, tried to focus in on that crime issue. I think we've seen a lot of polls that show crime is an issue, but maybe not the main issue Illinois voters care about. And whereas Darren Bailey, again, the Irvin campaign tried to run ads and mailers, basically accusing him of being a never Trumper. They took one Democrat primary ballot that he took in 2008 and tried to twist it around and make it seem like he wasn't a true conservative, which I just don't think a lot of primary voters bought. Darren Bailey is about as conservative as they come. As Ben said, he was really the one behind the protest of Governor Pritzker's mandates during the pandemic. So I think obviously, again, a lot of money was spent, but they just didn't have the message, and they didn't have an effective campaign strategy. Whereas Darren Bailey, whether it was, I'm sure Trump's endorsement helped, although it seemed like they just had the pulse on the Republican primary electorate in Illinois.
Let this be a lesson to all would-be candidates out there. Do not avoid talking to reporters. It's not going to be good for anyone. Although Bailey is not exactly the most press-friendly candidate either, right? So we'll see how this shakes out. You were talking about how Brenden, the DGA and Pritzker spent so much money trying to boost Bailey and sink Irvin. We saw a similar strategy with Pennsylvania Democrats with their gubernatorial primary. And I think that a lot of Democrats got sort of PTSD flashbacks to everyone saying how wouldn't it be great if Donald Trump were the Republican nominee in 2016 because we could beat him so easily. And Ben, you were writing about how Bailey was expressing a great degree of confidence that like we have the message, we can flip this state, we can win in November. Despite the fact that it's definitely going to trend a Republican year, what is the scenario in which Bailey unseats J.B. Pritzker in November? Like, what are the dominoes that would have to line up in order for that to happen?
That's a great question. It's hard to find them, quite frankly. Donald Trump is basically inside Darren Bailey in this race. They share very similar views, although Darren Bailey is a nicer guy than Donald Trump, I guess you could say. But aside from that, Donald Trump lost Illinois by 17 points in 2016. He lost by 17 points again in 2020. So if you're going to use the Trump endorsement, that's probably the margin that Darren Bailey faces. Now, this might be closer because this is a strictly Illinois race. We're competing here on Illinois issues, but it's really hard to see how a guy as conservative as Darren Bailey, who calls Chicago a hellhole, has advocated for kicking Chicago out of the state of Illinois, is somehow going to come out and win this race in November, because he's going to need a certain amount of support within Cook County itself just to be able to win this race. You will see a big map of red for him around the rest of the state in November, but unless something crazy happens here where Governor Pritzker ends up in some crazy kind of trouble, it's hard to see how there's really any way that even a moderate voter is going to want to come out for Darren Bailey.
Yeah, before this, I was looking back at the 2014 county by county breakdown in the gubernatorial race when the last time a Republican was elected governor in Bruce Rauner in Illinois. And I think it's really instructive because Rauner ended up winning by about 5 points, a decent margin. But Bruce Rauner won in DuPage County by 25 points. He won Lake County by 19 points. He won, Winnebago County, where Rockford is. He won St. Clair County, even in Metro East, by pretty significant margins. These are all counties where Pritzker won really decisively in 2018. So, and more importantly than that, like you were saying, Ben, Bruce Rauner took fully 1/3 of the vote in Cook County in 2014, which you have to keep that margin at least somewhat close in Cook County if you're going to win statewide. And if you call Chicago a hellhole, and if you try to cast Chicago off from the rest of the state, it's pretty hard to see how that happens.
And if I could just chime in very quickly, Alex, I mean, I had a Republican political operative kind of tell me the same thing, that, I mean, this isn't Alabama, this is Illinois. If you want to win in Illinois, you have to appeal to, as a Republican, you have to appeal to independents, and even some Democrats, up in the Chicago suburbs. And this person pointed to that. Yeah, I mean, 2014, Rauner only won by 4 or 5 points. I wouldn't consider that a blowout. Or Mark Kirk in 2010 against Alexi Janulius won by, I believe, by 1 point. So, there's a very tight needle that Republicans need to thread to win in Illinois. You need a good year nationally, which they had in 10 and 14. Looks like they're going to have this year. But you need the right candidate with the right amount of resources who can compete in the suburbs. And I think a lot of people would be skeptical about Bailey's ability to do that, given some of his more conservative positions that, again, popular with his Republican base, but maybe not with some of those independent voters, certainly not with Democrats near Chicago.
Right. All right. So let's move on and talk about some of these congressional matchups. Just briefly go through all of these. Ben, do you want to just quickly talk about the 6th congressional district? And we'll sort of go down the line here.
Yeah, so this is kind of a rare race in Illinois to see 2 incumbent Democrats up against each other. Marie Newman did not live in the 6th district. She was drawn out. She lived in Chewy's district. And that district had absolutely no path because of the Latino population there for her. So she was out in no man's land. Her best opportunity was to challenge Sean Casten. Marie Newman's quite a progressive in Congress. She often takes votes with a very certain select group of progressives out in DC. She's big on campaign finance reform. She doesn't like to take, those big contributions that most politicians take. And even just listening to her and Casten debate each other, you can see the differences, and it almost makes Sean Casten look more moderate. And whether it's what the district was looking for or not, I think people like Sean Casten, and he came out with a very clear mandate from voters as well, winning 75% of the vote on Tuesday night.
Right. This new Latino third district, the third district had been Marie Newman's district, and she was shafted in part to create this new majority Latino district that stretches from the northwest side of Chicago, sort of out into DuPage County. We were all expecting a relatively close race between Chicago Alderman Gil Villegas, who is somewhat moderate. I mean, he would certainly describe himself as progressive, but as Chicago Democrats come, he's probably right of the median. Very big on economic issues, is really leaning on his identity as a Marine Corps veteran. And then you had Delia Ramirez, who really comes from the sort of Chuy Garcia, Bernie Sanders school of this Latino progressive wave that has really been ascendant in Chicago, and especially on the Chicago's northwest side. On election day, I was talking to a union political operative who was saying that he had some data that showed that Delia Ramirez could beat Villegas by as much as 20 points. And I was pretty surprised at that. It turned out he was wrong, because he beat her by like 40 or 45 points. Or she beat him, I should say, by 40 or 45 points. It was an absolute blowout. Not just in Chicago, but she won really all over the district, including in some of those more conservative, DuPage County places. And a lot of the, progressives and Democratic Socialist organizers who were with Delia Ramirez were trying to shout from the rooftops, like, this is, to all of these like national reporters saying that, progressive candidates can't win in the suburbs and that they're going to be defeated by the like defund the police attacks. This is their answer. So that was sort of the top of the progressive slate that had a really great night on Tuesday. And likewise, Jonathan Jackson, who's a businessman and organizer, activist, anti-violence activist, and of course the son of the Reverend Jesse Jackson, was also endorsed by Bernie Sanders, also came out with a pretty decisive victory in that insanely crowded 17-way race for first congressional district, Bobby Rush's old district. So we'll sort of have to see how he governs. Brenden, you, switching gears 180 degrees, were covering the 15th district downstate, which was where Democrats in redistricting sort of forced two incumbent Republicans against each other. What happened there?
Yeah. So as you alluded to, this district is drawn as a Republican vote sink in the remap, in the gerrymandered map. So it includes most of the rural areas in central Illinois. So it pitted incumbent Congressman Rodney Davis against incumbent Mary Miller. Davis is the only one who lived in the district. They drew Miller just outside, but she thought she had a better chance against Davis than against Southern Illinois Rep Mike Bost. So basically this pitted Davis, who currently represents the 13th congressional district, which is a swingier district downstate, represents a lot of the urban areas down here. It was drawn for a Democrat, but he's won it every time, against Miller, who currently represents the 15th, who is, I guess we would say a firebrand, member of the Freedom Caucus, one of the more far right members. She's closely tied with, say, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, folks cut from that cloth. Whereas Davis is much more your typical mainstream conservative, Chamber of Commerce type of Republican. So this race kind of pitted these factions of the Republican Party against each other. Miller essentially accused Davis of, called him Rhino Rodney, said he wasn't sufficiently loyal to Trump. wasn't didn't vote with the president enough. She had the endorsement of President Trump. He came to the district last week and did a rally for her. It ended up looks like it was decisive because she ended up beating him pretty convincingly on election night. I believe it was 58% to 42% last I checked. Davis, more seasoned politician, had a better organization, more experience, a little bit more money. But Miller had Trump, and in that district, which voted for Trump, I believe, close to 70% in 2020. That's all that mattered. I think people weren't necessarily surprised that she won, even though Rodney has escaped political death before. Couldn't do it this time, but people were surprised by the margin. I think. I think you really saw the Trump factor, especially in some of those Western Illinois counties that neither of them had represented before. A lot of people at the rally that I covered on Saturday kind of told me, well, I don't know a whole lot about Miller or Davis, but if Trump is for Miller, then I'm for Miller. And so I think that was a decisive factor in that race.
So a pretty similar dynamic to where we were talking about the Bailey-Irvin race, and I think you could say that Mary Miller rode Bailey's coattails a little bit. What about the 17th district, which where sort of moderate Democrat Cheri Bustos, former DCCC chair, is retiring? What's going on there?
Yeah, this is going to be probably the most high-profile race, a congressional race in Illinois this cycle. As you alluded to, Cheri Bustos is a moderate Democrat, has represented it for the past 10 years. She barely survived in 2020 against Republican Esther Joy King, who is running again, has raised a lot of money, easily won her primary on Tuesday, and is kind of a favorite of national Republicans, and is kind of primed to maybe take that seat in a wave. The Democrats had a very crowded primary, which featured folks from all, factions of the party. Basically, you had Letissa Wallace, the former state rep, who was Daniel Biss's running mate in 2018. She was the more progressive candidate, more liberal candidate. Jonathan Logeman, who was a Rockford alderman, was kind of a favorite of the establishment, had some major trade union endorsements, major labor support. But the winner out of it was Eric Sorensen, who was a former TV meteorologist who worked in Rockford and the Quad Cities for several years. And it wasn't particularly close. He raised a decent amount of money, but I think you can't put a dollar value on the amount of name ID that he had just based on being on television for all those years in two of the major markets of that district. So he won the nomination. It's going to be Sorensen versus Esther Joy King. I believe the district voted for Biden by about 8 points. So it's going to be one of those key races in November. I believe most of the rating agencies have it as a toss-up, and Republicans feel like they're primed to take that seat, especially if it's a good year nationally.
Yeah, definitely been looking at that one. The 7th district, represented for years and decades by Representative Danny Davis, which goes from downtown Chicago sort of out into its west side and west suburbs. My favorite fun fact about this district is that it has more hospitals than any other congressional district in the country, because it has all the downtown ones and then the medical district. Keena Collins, I ran against Danny Davis 2 years ago and was not really taken all of that seriously, and he beat her pretty decisively. And then she came back this year with a lot more support from sort of more bona fide progressive groups, and it was forecast to be a pretty close race, and it was. Danny Davis won at the end of the day, only by about 5 or 6 percentage points. And this was after Danny Davis really called in the heavy guns, getting a endorsement directly from Joe Biden and from sort of the other really established congressional leaders. And Keena Collins, we saw, had a very, was very upset in her concession speech, basically saying, you can expend all this energy on rounding up all this political support. Why can't you get more resources to our district? And I think that it's safe to say that she's tapping into something very real in this district, that she's not going anywhere, and that Danny Davis, if anything, is going to have a harder time in 2 years. So we'll be watching that. And then lastly, Ben, can you just take us through the 13th district where Rodney Davis had been before, right?
Right. This was Rodney Davis's district and had been a very tight swing district over the last few election cycles. But during redistricting, state lawmakers really tightened this up. So now it's a very safe Democrat district, and it snakes basically from Champaign down through Decatur, through the urban areas of Springfield, and down towards St. Louis, and covers the more liberal areas in the Metro East. So taking the Democrat nomination with no surprise was Nikki Budzinski, former aide to Governor Pritzker. She was a very top level person, Pritzker administration, but she's also worked under the Biden administration as well as a high level aide as well. So she's got all the Democrat credentials. She knows what she's doing. She's very experienced. But then on the Republican side, we have Reagan Deering, and I guess you could call her, she's kind of a community activist, I guess. She's from Decatur, and Decatur, they have a soy processing plant, Archer Daniels Midland, very strong employer out there. So she's the one who came out on top of this race. It was kind of an interesting, a little bit of a crowded Republican primary with 4 candidates there. So that's the race we're going to see in November. It's 2 decently strong candidates, but the way the district is drawn, this is going to be a pretty easy win for the Democrats to take this district to Congress now.
All right. Let's move on, and we can just maybe quickly run through the Secretary of State's race. This is probably the most high-profile race, top of the ballot, statewide race on the Democratic side. It definitely was. So, Ben, I want to start with you again. Going into this, I mean, it seemed to me like Valencia was maybe lightly favored. It was definitely competitive. What ended up happening here?
Yeah, I agree with you. I thought the race would be a little bit closer than it was. Anna Valencia did get a decent amount of attention. It seemed like she was out there campaigning a little bit more. Alexei Janulius, he skipped a lot of forums, even skipping WTTW. But Anna Valencia carried a lot of baggage into this race, and it all came from her husband's lobbying work. So there's varying stories out there about, basically attempts by her husband to talk with her about his lobbying business, see if she was able to help out in her official capacity. There's even an investigation into her husband going on down in New Orleans regarding all this. It seems like at the end of the day, that really weighed her down. People were probably just concerned that we wouldn't be able to trust her. But I thought it was interesting, though, because Jesse White endorsed Anna Valencia, Governor Pritzker endorsed Anna Valencia, and neither of those endorsements stuck. And I thought, the Jesse White endorsement would have a lot of weight to it, because given he's so popular, he wins 75% of the vote every time he's ran around here. So I think that's it really came down to some of those issues with her ethics, and people maybe pulled Alexei's name back out of the back of their mind and remembered him, and gave him a second chance after losing to Mark Kirk.
Brenden, what happened on the Republican side of the ticket in the Secretary of State's race?
Yeah, on the Republican side, it was a rout. Dan Brady, a state representative from Bloomington, longtime state representative, easily defeated John Milhiser, who was the U.S. Attorney for Central Illinois under former President Trump. And Milhiser was the slate candidate, the Ken Griffin slate candidate. So I guess towards the end, it wasn't really a surprise, but when the slate was introduced, I think a lot of people just kind of expected a lot of money to be thrown at John Milhiser, and for him to mop the floor with Dan Brady, who has a lot of organizational backing, a lot of again, he's a great retail politician, but I think the expectation was that they would blanket the airwaves with ads, and that would be enough. But Millhiser really didn't get a lot of money from the Griffin folks from Irvin's campaign until I believe end of May, maybe early June. And Brady, I mean, Brady's been running for this for, officially since last November, but he'd been going around the state for well over a year, talking to people. And that really paid off. He was not outworked in this race. He obviously had a great ballot name. People maybe remember Bill Brady when he ran for statewide office. Obviously, it's an Irish name too. I don't know if that carries weight still, but he and also he talked about the office. He talked about constituent services and about the things that the Secretary of State actually does. Whereas I think a lot of people listened to Millhiser talk, and he talked a lot about corruption and former Speaker Madigan and getting more ethics back into government. And all those things are nice, but it's almost like, well, you're talking about those things. You're an attorney. Why aren't you running for attorney general? And so I think people kind of weighed what the office does, and they made a decision to support Dan Brady. And again, I don't think it was a surprise at the end, given how the race developed, kind of the same with how the governor's race went. But it was certainly not at the outset how we would have expected things to go. But it'll be interesting because I mean Brady's not a bomb thrower, and he could be competitive in November if obviously we've seen Alexi Giannoulias run statewide before, lost a high-profile Senate race. He had some baggage, and Dan Brady could possibly take advantage of that depending on the climate and if he gets the resources.
Okay. Whoever wins, their face will be plastered all over our DMVs and their signatures will be on our driver's license. All right, let's shift gears to Cook County. Ben, you were talking about how Jesse White did not have a great night in the Secretary of State's race. He also did not have a good night in the assessor's race because he was maybe one of the highest profile backers, at least in the political world, of Kari Steele, who was running against Fritz Kaegi. And just a refresher, Fritz Kaegi was elected in 2018. He was the kind of swashbuckling outsider reform candidate who took down then Assessor Joe Barrios. Barrios had been caught in a lot of really in-depth, Tribune investigation reporting showing that he had had his thumb on the scale in favor of basically well-connected downtown businesses and shifting the burden of property tax assessments onto homeowners, and especially people who, homeowners in lower income parts of the county. So Kaegi came in 2018 and has since then really radically shifted that calculus and hugely jacked up property tax assessments for downtown especially, but overall just businesses, commercial and industrial properties of all kinds, to the benefit of homeowners. His argument is basically just we're actually using real math instead of Barrios has been using fake math. We're reforming the system. We're getting the real numbers. Who did not like all of this was the real estate industry, and basically anyone who owns commercial property in Chicago was shouting from the rooftops about how he was absolutely destroying the county's economy. And it was very clear, I think, from the outset that we were going to see a strong candidate run against Kaegi, and they found Kari Steele, who was in a lot of ways a really good candidate. She sort of is well known and has name recognition not just from the Steele family, which is sort of a well-known Cook County dynasty, but also she's been president of the Cook County of the Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago since 2012, which is a really serious, billion-dollar budget agency. She was able to run on a real homegrown Chicago sort of background, and she had a lot to bring against Kaegi and was able to make a lot of sort of competence arguments based on a lot of conflicts that Kaegi had with other offices in the county, and things like this very controversial move that Kaegi pulled in halfway through 2020, right after the pandemic hit. He said, we're going to redo all of the assessments, basically without talking or without warning any of the other county offices first. We're going to redo all the assessments to factor in COVID, because as we know, COVID is going to probably lead to a big crash in the housing market. And so we need to cut all of the, homeowners' property values. Turns out COVID did not lead to a crash in the housing market. So these are all the things that Steele was trying to bring against Kaegi, and it really seemed like she had a very good shot. She had a good ballot name. Female candidates tend to, all things being equal, do well against male candidates. At the end of the day, her campaign ended up making a good number of mistakes, including just sort of like sloppy mistakes that people were able to seize on in a lot of her messaging. Things were spelled wrong a lot of the time, things like that. And during the home stretch of the campaign, Kaegi was really able to go on offense on a number of different points. Steele, especially because of her husband, who's a radio host named Maze Jackson, really has a big following in Chicago. And Maze Jackson basically said a lot of really inflammatory, anti-Semitic, anti-Latino, homophobic things. And Kaegi was really able to make a big deal out of that. And she was kind of apologizing for that, but also trying to separate herself and say, he's my husband and you shouldn't hold me to that. But also he's a very visible part of her campaign. He has Steele for Assessor, stickers behind him in his studio and everything. And more than that, he has worked as a lobbyist and has worked as a real estate lobbyist. And Kaegi was really able to use that and to his advantage, and especially down the stretch. Kagi's team was able to unearth that Steele claimed an improper tax exemption on her home. And Steele's campaign basically handled it by calling it an outright lie. And then Kagi's allies came out with more evidence showing that it was in fact an improper exemption. The campaign had a lot of trouble down the road. At the end, it was a modest but pretty decisive victory for Kaegi. He won by about 8 points across the county, and I think decisively he actually won by a little bit in the city. It was kind of conventional wisdom that he was going to do better in the suburbs, and that Steele she has a really solid base of support, especially on the west side with Jesse White and Walter Burnett, and on the south side she did very, very well in some of the higher turnout South Side wards like the 8th and 9th ward, but she did not. She was about evenly matched in the 4th and 5th ward, which are also pretty important high turnout wards. I think that one thing that the Kaegi campaign had been looking really closely at, they had a pretty deft campaign run by Elena Hampton, who ran Cook County Commissioner Bridget Degnan's campaign in 2018, and then Joanna Klonsky, who is a big consultant with Mayor Lightfoot's political campaign and other things. They were looking at the 47th ward, up a huge high turnout ward on the north side of Chicago, and the 47th ward Democrats endorsed Steele, and they were very worried about that district. It turns out 47th ward Democrats endorsed, or 47th ward Kaegi won the ward and the 48th. So I think that was a big part of what put him over the top. And this Cook County race got a lot of coverage. It was probably the highest profile Cook County race. What did not get as much coverage, and I think really deserves to, is the Board of Review, which essentially what happens in the Cook County tax assessment process is that Kaegi has his values and his assessments on everyone's property, and then anyone who thinks that that's wrong can appeal to the Cook County Board of Review, which is a 3-district board divided into different districts around the county. Tammy Went, who is here on the right, won in sort of an upset, a big upset in 2020. She ousted the Republican on the Board of Review and has really clashed with the other 2 Board of Review commissioners for all kinds of reasons that we don't really have time to get into. This is sort of a distillation of her relationship with Michael Cabinargi. This is from their last public meeting that they had. Michael Cabinargi is one of the other 2 Board of Review commissioners, along with Larry Rogers. Went and Cabinargi were both up for re-election. Went lost to Chicago Alderman George Cardenas as expected, and Cabinargi actually lost in a very big upset to Samantha Steele, a challenger, no relation to Kari Steele, a challenger who was really trying to carry on Kaigi's legacy of sort of reforming the system and getting at insiders and try to sort of change the whole thing. And so Cabanargi has not conceded yet, as far as I know. They say they're still watching votes. It's a margin of about 3,000 votes. Samantha Steele won really big in the city, and Cabanargi won in his county suburban precincts, but there are very few votes still left out to count, so it looks pretty much done. That's going to be a big shake-up on the Board of Review, and that leaves Larry Rogers, who is the last commissioner who's allied with Cabanargi on the Board of Review, in a very tough position. I think there have been some speculative rumors running around that Larry Rogers might even retire. He's probably going to face a big challenge in 2022, which is the next time that or 2024, which is the next time that he is up. And so this could be a real sea change at the Board of Review. All right, let's run through some of these Cook County Commissioner races. Nothing, I think, was really that earth-shaking, except, but still very important. The exception was a big result in the 8th district, which is one of the 17 Cook County Commissioner districts. The 8th district is an all-city district on the northwest side of Chicago, basically encompassing the whole Latino northwest side of Chicago, pretty much from Bucktown out to Montclair, Belmont, Cragen. Has been represented for 8 years by Luis Arroyo Jr., whose name may be familiar if you're a Springfield watcher, because his father, Luis Arroyo Sr., was convicted on some bribery and corruption charges and was just sentenced a month or two ago to several years in prison. And of the 17 incumbent, or of the 14 incumbent Cook County commissioners, 3 of the 17 are retiring, 14 of them are running for re-election. Of those 14, only 4 of them actually face primary challengers. And the Sean Morrison, Dennis Deere, and Frank Aguilar, the incumbents who had primary challengers, kind of dispatched them pretty easily. The exception was Luis Arroyo, who had 4 different challengers. People just sensed that he was very vulnerable, and they said that he had not been doing a lot of work in the district and just hasn't been accomplishing a lot. And so that set up an opening for Edwin Reyes, who was on the board previously, and also Anthony Joel Quesada, pictured here summoning Lord Cthulhu from the deep. He is a Democratic Socialist organizer. He is Director of Constituent Services for Alderman 35th Ward, Chicago, Alderman Carlos Ramirez Rosa. And saw an opening here and won pretty decisively by really cleaning house in the eastern part of that district in Logan Square and sort of Avondale, Bucktown, and unseated Luis Arroyo. So the other contested races, there was a big open primary for the 5th district, which is far south side and south suburbs, where Deborah Sims, who's been there since the 90s, retired, and she basically handpicked her successor, Monica Gordon, who's a administrator at Chicago State University. She won pretty handily. Chuck Cerniglia won the Republican primary in the 15th district, and he will take on Commissioner Kevin Morrison in the fall. We'll talk about that, but that's going to be a competitive race. And then Daniel Calandriello won. He'll take on Sean Morrison, who is an all-suburban district, and Morrison is the Cook County Republican Party chair. That'll be pretty contested too. That one was close in 2018. This year, different dynamics. We'll see. I skipped over the 9th district. This is Peter Silvestri's district. He is a super moderate centrist Republican, to the point that some Republicans would call him, would say that he's not super Republican, that he sides with President Tony Preckwinkle on a lot of things, and he is retiring. Matt Podgorski is the now Republican nominee to replace him. Podgorski he says that he is sort of a protege of Silvestri, but also Podgorski is definitely not centrist. He is a founder of the Northwest Side GOP Club, which is a really kind of conservative, pro-Trump organizing vehicle on the Northwest Side. And so he is trying to, pull that district to the right. He's going to face Monica Trevor. I'm sorry, that's actually Maggie Trevor. Maggie Trevor, the name is wrong there. Sorry about that. Is running against, or you may remember her as coming, I think, like 100 votes from unseating Tom Morrison, State Rep Tom Morrison, in 2018. She's run a couple times there. She lives in Rolling Meadows and now finds herself, which had been part of the 15th district in the Cook County Board, and now she finds herself in the 9th district. She is running there, and she seems pretty confident that she can flip this district, but it is a purple-ish district, but pretty red, and especially this year, it's going to be an uphill climb for her. Okay, now I'm going to try to catch my breath and give it back to you guys. Thank you for accommodating my long Cook County spiel. So, Ben, you have a story this morning about the 7 sitting state lawmakers who look like they are either have been or are about to be unseated once all the votes are counted. Can you walk us through some of those and sort of who were the most surprising?
Yeah, I think these races, it's always kind of hard to tell who's going to be out and who's not. You know, there's never really good polling on these races. And if you ask the campaigns, they'll all tell you that they're ahead. But I think by far, definitely the most shocking and the one that is really going to change things in Springfield is Mike Zaleski has lost a very close primary. You know, he's down only about 200 votes, you know, whether mail-in changes that or not, who knows? But Zaleski did concede on Tuesday night to Abdul Nassar. I think he goes by Naz Rashid. And, you know, Rashid really put Zaleski in a corner. This was Zaleski's very first competitive race. He's been in office for over a decade. But this was the first time he's really been challenged on, you know, his record. And on one hand, you could probably say that he has a record that Democratic voters, you know, could have rewarded him for. He's behind the tax relief package that takes effect tomorrow. He runs the House Revenue Committee, which is, you know, an extremely important and high-level job. He's part of these budget negotiations and all that. And he's very well liked in Springfield. People on both sides of the aisle like him. Progressives in the Democrat Party, Republicans like him. He gets along well with everybody. But Rashid really highlighted 2 things on his record: that his father's former Chicago alderman, Mike Zaleski, and that's obviously there's a lot of baggage with the Madigan ties because Representative Zaleski is a Madigan ally. His father has been implicated but not charged with anything in this ComEd probe in the Madigan, and you know, people are paying attention to that, and that does worry people. And then the second part is he voted against a bill to end parental notification of abortion for minors. And obviously, since that is now a hot button issue, it's going to be the most important issue going into November. Democrat voters want somebody who is completely pro-choice. And, you know, Zaleski is a very pro-choice lawmaker, but he had that one misstep, I guess you could say, on his record, and that seemed to be enough to undo him. Kathleen Willis also appears to be on her way out as well. I don't think that's completely finalized, but she's been in the House for 10 years. She's a very strong lawmaker, very experienced. She's behind Illinois' red flag laws. She really helps to guide other younger lawmakers through their bill process. You know, every time another Democrat gets stuck presenting a bill, she'll press her light and she'll speak and ask them questions to get them back on track. So that's some experience that they're going to lose there on the Democrat side. Not to mention that, you know, House Majority Leader Greg Harris is also going to be out. So that's 2 of the top budget people on that side are going to be gone. If you go over to the Republican side, Leader David Welter is going to be out too. He got absolutely destroyed in a primary against a much more conservative Jed Davis from down the far southwest side of the Chicago area. Davis was backed by Darren Bailey, and Welter has shown kind of an ability to work bipartisanly. He did support the CJA bill last year, and I guess, you know, the voters in the district took note of that.
Sorry, you said CJA, that's Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, the big climate bill from last year?
Right. Yeah, and then just the other 4 who are going to be gone as well. Sam Yingling lost his try for the Senate against Mary Edley Allen, so Mary Edley Allen will be coming back to the General Assembly. Eric Mattson, the newest state senator from Joliet, he got basically destroyed in a primary down there, so his career was going to be over after about 6 months. Mark Luft, Mayor Pekin, he's there on his first term. He's lost that race as well, and it looks like Denise Stonebeck is going to be gone as well to a more progressive challenger.
So just quickly moving on to the Attorney General's race on the Republican side, this also drew a lot of attention. Just quickly here, because we're running a little low on time, but Brenden, who is Tom DeVore and how did he win? And sort of what does that mean going forward?
So Tom DeVore is a downstate attorney who is probably best known for being the guy behind all the legal challenges to Governor Pritzker's mask mandates and I guess executive orders during the pandemic, basically challenging his executive authority to take the actions that he took during the pandemic. So DeVore is gotten very well known because of that, because he's been in the news. He's been bringing all these lawsuits that have really gotten him attention. So he won against Steve Kim and David Shistokis, I believe. I want to say, but Kim was the slate candidate, the Griffin slate candidate, who had run for office before. I believe he ran in 2010 as the lieutenant gubernatorial candidate for one of the candidates that was unsuccessful. But he was a pretty high-profile international attorney. But DeVore had a lot of support among the Republican base because he's very closely tied with Senator Bailey. And you know, when Bailey was in court in Clay County early in the pandemic, challenging the mask mandate, DeVore was right there with him. And not that he spent a lot of money, but honestly, he didn't really need to, because people knew who he was, especially downstate, even up near Chicago. People knew who he was. So he is a character, I guess you can call him that. He's very active on social media and he's got a very engaging personality. But some would say that he's maybe a little kind of like Bailey, maybe a little too conservative to win. Kwame Raoul obviously did not have an opponent on the Democratic side, but it'll make for, at the very least, a colorful race. Let's just put it that way. DeVore isn't known for being subtle, and it'll be interesting because he was initially running for a judgeship in downstate Illinois, but he switched gears to run for attorney general, which is interesting because he probably would have been a shoo-in for that judgeship if he wanted it in conservative downstate. But DeVore certainly likes the attention that he gets.
He's getting his name out there, if nothing else. Yeah. So
he'll like that. He'll like that statewide attention for sure.
Yeah, DeVore and Kwame Raoul duking it out for Attorney General in November. A couple other ones quickly. The Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, which I mentioned before, people tend not to really pay attention to, but it's the $1.2 billion agency that gets 6% of our property tax money in Cook County and is responsible basically for everything that flushes down the toilet and flood mitigation. Super important agency, and also is used as sort of a proving ground for a lot of rising star Democrats. And the Cook County Democratic Party slate won out in the 3 regular spots for 6-year terms, though. Marian Esperopoulos was reelected, and then Yumika Brown from the south suburbs, the Madison Village Clerk, and Patricia Teresa Flynn, who just barely missed a seat on the district board 2 years ago. They won pretty decisively, but there was a little bit of an upset in there was another spot for a 2-year term to replace Deborah Shore, who had been a commissioner on the Water Rec District until she was appointed to oversee the Midwest region for the EPA, for the US EPA. J.B. Pritzker appointed Chicana Perry to fill out the rest of her term. Chicana Perry ran for, there's this special election as part of this for the 2-year term to finish out the rest of Shore's term. Chicana Perry came in a distant third, which means that Pritzker either was not invested in or not effective in getting Chicana Perry, keeping her on the board after he put them there. But the Democratic Party slated candidate, Daniel Pogorzelski, who is very well known within the party, who's a longtime aide to Senator then Representative Rob Martwick and also to Treasurer Mike Frerichs. He was slated by the party, and almost all the votes counted. He's down by about 1,000 votes. So it looks like he could lose. It'd be a little bit of an embarrassing loss for the slate, and Elizabeth Joyce could get that position. Ben, you talked about the big open primary for Greg Harris's district up in the 13th district on the north side of Chicago, in sort of the North Lakefront stretching into Lincoln Square and West Ridge. This is not only a big district because it was, represented by the majority leader, but also because this is a very, very high turnout and very politically engaged district. Like I mentioned, the 47th Ward, which is this like juggernaut political organization, and all of these forces lined up behind Eileen Dordek, who had name recognition as a former aldermanic candidate, was, abortion rights were a big part of her platform, really seemed like this race was hers to lose. And Han Nguyen ended up winning. Nguyen is the son of Vietnamese refugees and the Harvard and Yale grad, and came back to Chicago to work at a nonprofit a couple of years ago. I tweeted about this, but Nguyen did not have very much institutional support except for some political independent organizations and from State Rep Theresa Ma. But I happen to live in that district, and he just painted this entire district purple with his signs, and he personally handed me his palm card at a red line station. His volunteers found me multiple times and bugged me multiple times. The precinct that I voted at, there was one Eileen Dordek volunteer and 2 Han Nguyen volunteers. He just had an absolute army. And he, supposedly, as he said, knocked on 250 doors a day, every single day for months. So it worked. And that gets into, some of the impacts that we'll get to of organizing and ground game and stuff like that. I want to take a quick pause and thank everyone who has posted questions and comments in the chat here. We're going to leave some time at the end to talk about them, and feel free to add any other questions if you have any. In judicial races, there's not a whole lot that we can talk to here, but the County Democratic Party went, I think, 8 for 12 on its slate. Both of its slated appellate court candidates lost, and Howard Brookins, who had slated for a circuit court position, who's a Chicago alderman and 21st Ward Democratic committeeman, lost, which was a pretty unexpected and embarrassing loss for him. Not only that, but because he lost most heavily in the city. He did well in the suburbs and lost in the city. So I don't know, there's a very little explanation from that of him. His maybe just sleptwalked through that campaign or was outdone by his competitor. Also, who lost in sub-circuit races were Chris Taliaferro, also a Chicago alderman, and Jackie Portman Brown lost her sub-circuit race. Jackie Portman Brown was one of only 2 judges to not be retained in the past several decades. She was very controversial judge. She was basically fired by voters in a circuit position. 2 years ago, she tried to become the first ever judge who was booted and then try to run again for a sub-circuit. She lost. State Central Committeeman races, we maybe don't have a time to get really into, but there's been some chatter in Politico and Capital Facts today about sort of how this is going to shake out for Pritzker's chosen candidates, because what really matters here is that they're going to decide whether Robin Kelly, U.S. Representative Robin Kelly, stays on as the chair of the party. Before we move on, does either of you guys want to chime in really quick on what the landscape is and that sort of battle between Pritzker and Kelly and what that would mean for the party in November?
I could touch upon it a little bit. This is really stemming from the fight from last year following former Speaker Madigan's resignation as TPI chair. Basically, you had Governor Pritzker and Senator Duckworth had backed Chicago Alderwoman Michelle Harris, and obviously Senator Durbin had strongly backed Robin Kelly, who ended up winning by almost the thinnest of margins. And these state central committee races are kind of inside baseball, but they can have significant impact, especially with Illinois competing to host the Democratic National Convention in 2024, competing to be an early primary state in that election too. And there were some real concerns from Pritzker's side about Robin Kelly serving, because she's very limited in her ability to fundraise because she's a federal office holder. Those concerns haven't gone away. So Pritzker has put some money behind candidates in some of these races. And we don't have a full picture yet, but I know there are some that have lost. Down here in the 15th, Liz Brown Reeves lost to Catherine Daniels, and I believe Natalie Manley is losing right now in her race in the 14th. But at the same time, some of Pritzker's candidates have won or winning. State Senator Melinda Bush in the 10th district is leading incumbent Lauren Beth Gash. And so that would be a Pritzker ally on the committee. And it'll be, we're going to have to see how it all shakes out. And because again, the vote for party chair is all weighted. It's all depending on how many people voted in the primary. And so we'll have to do the math, but it wouldn't be surprising if we saw another fight for party chair in the next month or so. Which would make for an interesting rally at the state fair in August. We'll see if the party's unified by then.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's definitely something we'll have to watch. So let's just talk about some of our takeaways overall from this week and the races. We got a question about turnout from Kurt, and I'm glad you brought this up, because this was definitely a big takeaway, is that turnout was way down, certainly from 2018, which was just a bigger, sort of more energized Democratic year, and there was a contested Democratic primary for governor. I'm not sure what it was statewide, but turnout in Chicago was around 20%, which is not quite as bad as 2014, which was just the historic low from decades and decades, around 18%. So pretty low turnout. And I'm glad that Kurt asked what impact did the low voter turnout have on races, because I think that one impact that I definitely drew out and it hurt a lot is that kind of just shoe leather ground game organizing matters much more in low turnout races, because that's how you are getting people actually interested and engaged, and those are the people who are actually going to vote. Whereas in the 2020 race, we got a lot of people who were there to vote for Donald Trump or Joe Biden, and then just sort of like tick off whatever other names they see based on instinct. This really was an election where if someone was voting, it was because they really know about and care about the race, and they've been talked to and engaged with. And I think that's what the sort of Northwest Side progressive organizers who got Deli Ramirez and Anthony Quesada over the top would tell you. Jeff says, 13th Ward, 13% turnout. Fitting, also surprising for a ward very well known for turning out its people. So what's going on, Marty Quinn? Okay. Do you guys have any thoughts about the low turnout? What takeaways from that?
I guess one thing I will say is I think obviously, and Ben kind of touched upon some of these races, it really helped a lot of maybe the extremes in each party. If you were a more progressive Democrat or a more Trumpy Republican, it seems like those candidates had pretty good days. And I suppose that could be because if you're voting in a partisan primary, it brings out maybe the most partisan folks on each side. And if there's low turnout, well, you have the most dedicated people. And so I think that certainly helped candidates who are maybe more to the left or more to the right, depending on which ballot you took.
Yeah, definitely. I think that we're seeing that that middle is dissipating a little bit, that it's going to be very, very partisan, and that politics are nationalizing in a lot of ways. I think you see that with the Republican backlash against COVID mitigations being the main issue, and, sort of critical race theory and school curricula being the main issue here. I think we saw it on the Democratic side where, I was talking to Anthony Quesada, the victorious Cook County Commissioner candidate who unseated Arroyo, and what he was saying was, I want to know where Luis Arroyo stands on forgiving student loan debt. I want to know where Luis Arroyo stands on a Green New Deal, and Medicare for all and things like that. Whereas Arroyo was really campaigning on, like, I am from here and I'm going to bring services to the district, and I'm not afraid to roll my sleeves up and do community service myself, which is really sort of the old style of politics in Illinois, of like, I'm going to deliver material resources and wins for you and your family, basically.
The same could be said about down here in Illinois 15 with Rodney Davis and Mary Miller. Rodney Davis, more your old school. I'm going to bring home the bacon. I'm going to bring resources back to the district. I'm going to get money for that bridge or this road project or whatever it is. And Mary Miller is just Trump, Trump, Trump. Rodney Davis, they brought back earmarks a few years ago. Rodney Davis has, brings back earmarks. Mary Miller doesn't do that. But again, it's nationalized, and so people don't really care about some of those local issues as much anymore. It's not as much of an impact.
Yeah, I did want to. That's a good point. I did want to touch a little bit on the Cook County Democratic Party and its slating process. I think they did reasonably well. A lot of their highest profile candidates, like Alexi Giannoulis and Fritz Kaegi, won. Most of their judicial candidates won. Most of their water rec candidates won. Michael Cabinargi, I think, was the biggest upset. I think that this is always the question for me, is like, because even 20 years ago, it was sort of like whoever was slated, especially in these down ballot races, whoever was slated just got the job, was elected. And so I'm always trying to understand what is the level of that, old Democratic machine power in Cook County. This was a tough one. I think you can sort of squint at it and draw whatever conclusion you want from it, because you could say that Alexi Giannoulis was really helped by that, but also there had to have been, definitely were a lot of other factors at play. I mean, you could say the same thing about Fritz Kaegi. I mean, there were 100 reasons why Toni Preckwinkle wiped the floor with her challenger, Richard Boykin. So I don't know, something we'll continue to look at. Another big takeaway I wanted to touch on here was that the Fraternal Order of Police in Chicago tried to run a number of candidates against sitting state reps and senators. They ran Aaron Jones against Senator Rob Martwick. They ran against Lindsay LaPointe. Someone help me out.
Tina Wallace, real estate agent, but still FOP backed.
Yes, and then Carolyn Crump against Sonia Harper. Came pretty close to knocking Sonia Harper off the ballot, but she managed to stay on. All three of those challengers lost big. They lost heavily. So another bit of gloating that those Northwest Side progressives were doing over that, and a setback for John Catanzara and his FOP movement to try to infiltrate the Chicago political world more. All right. Any other big takeaways that you guys are carrying out of this week that we should be keeping in mind?
Yeah, I guess just going almost to the last point there is, I guess, how partisan this week turned out. The progressives did really well. The far right people did really well. And, that's going to be the choices for voters in November. So what does that mean for moderate independent voters? We'll have to see. I think, some of them may be, they may feel like, well, what's the point again? Because we have, two options we don't like or something like that. But maybe some of the takeaway is also that money isn't everything. And, Darren Bailey made the point on Tuesday night that he was outspent by a billionaire in this race, and he's going to be outspent again by another billionaire in November. But, people without money, as long as they have a movement, they can do well. So we'll have to watch for people's movement. The energy behind these campaigns will be a big thing to watch going forward.
Yeah.
So a couple of observations. Not a great night for Speaker Welch, having three of his incumbents lose. One of the reasons Speaker Madigan was kept around so long by his members is because they knew he could protect them. He could send in precinct workers, give them money, everything they needed to win their races, make sure they got back to Springfield. and Speaker Welch was pounding the pavement with his members. He was very high profile and trying to help them out, but he couldn't get 3 of them across the finish line, which will be interesting to see how that affects his hold on the caucus. And then on the Republican side, this is Donald Trump's party, even in Illinois. I think a lot of people, even like among the establishment, if you will, were under this illusion that the party was still a little bit different, cut from a different cloth. The Jim Edgars and Jim Thompsons of the world, the moderates. But the party's changed. It's less country club, less suburban, more downstate, more blue collar, and the results reflect that. The issues that voters care about in a Republican primary reflect that, and I think that a lot of folks on that side of the aisle are going to have to do some reflecting, especially how do you compete in a increasingly blue state when your base is increasingly going the other way. So it's a tougher needle to thread moving forward for that side.
One bit of good news for Chris Welch is that it looks like his wife, Shantae Rains Welch, is going to win her race for judge in the Cook County 4th Subcircuit. It's a pretty close race, but that's one win for him or his family. One other takeaway that we didn't write here, well, 2 actually that I quickly want to bring up. One is that Chicago aldermen, Chicago elected officials, Anna Valencia included, got wrecked. Sort of a loser here is Lori Lightfoot, who was hoping to have a lot of opportunities to appoint a lot of other new faces in the city council. One Chicago elected official did win, that was George Cardenas, and so Lightfoot was asked about this today and said she'll sort of go through the same process. She'll get the opportunity to appoint a new older person in the Southwest Side 12th Ward. I think another big takeaway here, or a minor takeaway, but that is important, is we just saw the continuation of Chuy Garcia's inexorable, slow takeover of the Chicago area Democratic Party, especially with Delia Ramirez's win, and really just the fall. We're seeing a lot of the extant, Madigan, Barrios, Arroyo dynasty forces sort of melt away and become sort of more sclerotic and get taken over by more of these, especially like progressive Latino candidates. I mean, we talked a lot about the Northwest side progressive victories, but also on the Southwest side, Selena Villanueva, who is heavily backed by Chuy Garcia, won really decisively against her challenger, Rafael Yanez. So I'm really looking at who Chuy Garcia is going to back in the city elections in 2023, because he has had a lot of success in all of the even-yeared, state and county elections, but Chuy's candidates completely whiffed in Chicago in 2019. So, and that, we feel the effect of that on the city council. So we'll see what happens in 23. Ken Griffin's candidates lost everywhere. He is taking his ball and leaving to Florida. We wish him well. All right. Just last things. I mean, I think we already sort of touched on a lot of these, but the Secretary of State race, do you guys think it's going to be really competitive? Is it going to be close?
I think it's the Republicans' best chance to win a statewide election. Dan Brady's going to run a good campaign, I think, like he just did. But, it's going to be tough just given the top of the ticket with Darren Bailey and, the Trump world that the Republican Party has become.
Yeah, I agree with Ben. I mean, I think it is their best chance, but I think the level of ticket splitting as the country's gotten so increasingly partisan is less and less. So if Bailey drags down ticket, that's going to drag Brady down, even if Janulius has some of his own unique challenges that we know about from his last statewide run. But yeah, I mean, Dan Brady's going to run a hard race, and I mean Secretary of State is a big office. I mean, a lot of jobs you control, your name is everywhere. It's a great jumping off point to run for higher office, which many politicians have done in the past before Jesse White. So if a Republican get in there, maybe that's their foothold to get back. Or hey, if Alexei wins, if he could possibly run for governor or Senate one day.
We heard a lot of back a couple months ago when Pat Dowell was running for Secretary of State, her sort of stump speech line, which was squarely aimed at Alexei, was, "I'm not just using this as a political stepping stone. I really want this office," which in retrospect is a little ironic because she immediately switched over to become a congressional candidate. But point being, she was very heavily implying, and I think a lot of people think that Alexei Giannoulis, has stars in his eyes and wants to run for something after that. We'll see. Before that, he would have to get elected in November. We talked about the contested congressional races. So we expect Democrats to lose probably a good number of state legislative seats all over the country. My question for you guys is exactly how much do you think Democratic gerrymandering and Pritzker's, gobs of money can head off that wave?
I mean, on the legislative side, I mean, the Democrats drew a really good map for on the legislative side. They're a little bit sloppier on the congressional side. There might be some opportunities even beyond the 17th or even the 13th, where the Republicans might be competitive. I mean, so maybe you can look at Bill Foster's district, or even Sean Casten's district in the Chicago suburbs. But on the legislative front, I mean, the Democrats, even if they lose some seats, I mean, they're probably going to lose some seats in the Senate because they already have a super majority.
I think the super duper majority is the official term.
Super duper majority. So you have some low hanging fruit there for Republicans. I know I've heard they're targeting 6 or 7 seats in the Senate this cycle, which even if they win all of those would still leave them a few short of taking the majority. And obviously they're not that close in the House either. So honestly, what might happen is they will have a shot, I think, especially in the House, to win enough seats to take away that supermajority, which could be big. I mean, the Democrats it's a diverse caucus. They don't always agree on everything. So if you give them a few less votes, that might stop some legislation that Pritzker's been able to get through the past few years from getting through in the future. So I think the map protects them, but I think a Republican wave, especially in the suburbs, could help Republicans. But then again, Bailey at the top of the ticket could also drag them down.
Michelle and Jeff ask, how much is Bill Foster, who you mentioned, the 11th district Democrat, in danger from his Republican challenger, Catalina Lauf?
I don't know if he's that much in danger. Catalina Lauf is pretty extreme. She's kind of like a younger Mary Miller. She worked in the Trump administration. She was appointed by a former president. So Republicans they'll really love her because that's their thing now, is really Trumpy candidates. There's a lot of rural portions, Republican portions of that district. But in theory, that map was drawn so Bill Foster could win that seat. So it'll be a closer one, is one to watch. I still think that one leans Bill Foster, especially since it was not a moderate candidate who was nominated.
One last thing that I'm certainly going to be watching is we have, I would say, 4 of the 17 Cook County Commissioner races are going to be competitive. There's the 9th district, where Pete Silvestri's open district, the 14th and 15th district up in the north and northwest suburbs, and then of course the 17th district, where Democrats will try to flip Sean Morrison's seat again. Yeah, well, I just sort of added at the end, will Pritzker low-key campaign for president? I don't know. It's something that we're all going to be watching. Obviously, he's still saying as long as Joe Biden is president, he's not going to say, yes, I'm going to run for president. But I don't know. Any thoughts on this, guys, whether he has already shown or whether that might, I don't know. Do you think that November and the general election will sort of be instructive as to what his next ambitions are?
I think he wants to run. It's where is the timing going to line up? Because challenging Joe Biden doesn't seem like much of an option. So does that mean 2028, which means he'd have to do 4 more years as governor? I don't know. I think he's really interested in it, but the timing isn't great, and there's a lot of conversations that need to happen in the Democrat Party just on what kind of candidate they want anyway.
Yeah. Okay, I want to get into the last questions here, and I apologize to everyone. I know we're over time. We did it again. But I want to run through these questions that we didn't get to. Michelle and Jeff, can you talk about Kathy Salvi's win and if there's any momentum against Tammy Duckworth?
I think Kathy Salvi was a bright spot for the GOP establishment. She is probably the most mainstream of all the candidates. There were a lot of extreme candidates that were in that primary, and a lot of people kind of overlooked it because Senator Duckworth has a lot of strength as a candidate, is not particularly viewed as vulnerable, especially given the nationalized nature of elections. It's easier to localize a governor's race than it is a Senate race, and Duckworth is a strong candidate. But Kathy Salvi will at least make it where you can't just write it off. She's run for office before. Her husband is Al Salvi, who is a former state representative, I believe, and he ran against Irvin in '96. So they've been around for a while, and it'll be something maybe to keep an eye on, but I don't think Tammy Duckworth has anything to worry about. I think most would say that she's probably a lock to go back to the Senate.
So how about 14th Congressional District? Lauren Underwood came pretty close to being unseated in 2020. Did they draw her a safe enough district to not have to worry about Scott Ryder, the Republican challenger, or will that be a real race?
I think it should be okay for Underwood. I'm trying to even remember that district because it's completely new. It covers a lot more of the area Adam Kinzinger currently has. Right now, Underwood's district extends up north of Naperville. Now it goes down south. This is another one. It's just like Bill Foster's district. There's rural areas. There's an opportunity for a Republican here. It's a lean. As Brenden kind of alluded to earlier, the Democrats were kind of sloppy with how they drew this map, so it leans to the left. But it's not out of the question that, especially if politics shifted over time, that seat could go back red. I don't know very much about Scott at all. I think he's kind of a more moderate candidate in the race, if I'm not mistaken. But I think it's an Underwood district.
Okay, well then I guess we'll leave it there. I want to thank everyone so much for joining us, and thank you to Daily Line legislative reporter Ben Szalinski and Lee Enterprises political and government reporter Brenden Moore. Thank you so much for taking all of this time to share all of your wisdom with us and everyone who tuned in. Don shared the Twitter bios to follow us on Twitter and get more of our political chatter, Illinois and Chicago political observations. And as always, follow and subscribe to the Daily Line. You can subscribe to our free review newsletter. And have a great 4th of July weekend, everyone. We'll maybe be back soon to talk about the special session or next city council meeting. Things are not slowing down. All right.
Thanks, Brenden.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, guys.